Hello everyone out there and welcome. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're broadcasting the webcast from Sydney on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nations, who've looked after this country, its waters and all living things for centuries. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and we'd also like to acknowledge that people are joining the webinar from other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lands and countries and pay our respects to their elders past and present as well on your behalf. First of all, I'd like to talk about what we're going to cover in the webinar. So we'll be talking about why action research with building safe communities. And sorry, as I do this, I'm going to turn off my webcam so that you'll see the slides, and we'll come back to you with the webcam at the end of this webinar. Okay. So we'll be talking about why action research with building safe communities for women and their children projects. I'll give a little bit of an outline about ANROWS. We've got some new projects that have joined us who may not know much about ANROWS. Talk about the action research support plan that we have in place. Look at action research principles and practice. Again, talking about how to keep it simple when you're doing action research, and talk through a couple of examples. Now, throughout this time of the webinar, we'll stop at various points to do what's called taking some polls and also getting just checking in if you have any questions. Before moving on to this next slide, I just wanted to remind us that we're all also impacted directly or indirectly by domestic and family violence, and to remind you that the services in each state and territory are available on the ANROWS website or through the website of 1-800-RESPECT. Now, the Department of Social Services called for tenders to do this work, and they wanted an action research approach that will involve other organisations, contribute to building community networks in the successful project areas, use up to 3 action research cycles, refine processes as part of the action research, and ensure that the experiences and understandings gained by projects are shared by other communities. Now, sharing other experience is in a sense your project story. Moving on now to who ANROWS is, just to let you know that ANROWS is funded through all levels of government and jurisdiction. So the funding comes from the Commonwealth, the state and the territories, as well as at times like this project has a specific time-limited funding as a contract with the Department of Social Services. So our stakeholders at ANROWS are those levels of government, service providers such as domestic and family violence and sexual assault service providers, researchers who are doing the work about violence against women and their children, and of course ultimately the major stakeholders are women and their children themselves. If we move on to the next slide, we'll be telling you about the operational model at ANROWS. So there's 3 aspects to the work that ANROWS does in their core functions. One is to produce knowledge which is related to the ANROWS research program. The next one is to ensure that that knowledge is usable and translated, so it's shared through publications at conferences and forums and capacity building events. And the organisation shows leadership in relation to violence against women and makes submissions, participates on task forces and engages with senior officials, peak bodies and ministers. why ANROWS is supporting the Building Safe Community for Women and Children projects is that it's part of ANROWS' vision to be an innovative research organisation with that leadership to ensure there's a high impact to support the national plan to reduce violence against women and their children. So there again, it's the mission of ANROWS, pardon me, to deliver relevant and translatable research. And this project is about applying research on the ground. The national research agenda that ANROWS is engaged with has specific themes. So it's about looking at the experience and impacts of violence. It's ensuring that we know about what can impact on gender inequality and prevention work, what is known about improving service responses and interventions, and taking a whole systems approach as well as local approaches. And the ARS fits with these strategic research themes, in particular the gender inequality and primary prevention theme. We've moved on there, Tina moved on to the next slide, but you can see there action research is part of the research program at ANROWS. And at this point, I'd just like to remind you, if you have any questions, to write them down and we'll come back to them. So the support and expectations about your action research project, which is the next slide. We'll just move on there, Tina, if we can, yeah. So the Department of Social Services engaged ANROWS as a specialist research organisation to do the work beside the the Safe Communities for Women grant recipients because of the knowledge that ANROWS has about violence against women. And ANROWS is engaged to support you to access that information about preventing violence and assist you with action research to document and share the lessons from your project. One of the expectations that was clearly stated in the grants was that organisations receiving the grants were expected to set aside some money within that grant for attendance of staff at workshops and webinars. And I think this is one of the questions we've got, particularly for the new projects, as we've been in contact with the existing projects, but we've got a poll question here that I'll hand over to Tina.
Thanks, Liz. So this is the first poll question. Have you set time aside and funds to participate in the action research events? So we're interested to know what your response is there. We'll keep this slide open until we see that everybody's voted either yes or no, or submitted your yes or no answer. At the moment, I can see that 46% of you have actually submitted an answer, so I'll just leave it open for a couple more minutes. You just select yes or no and select submit, and we can see your answer there. So I'll just give it a couple more seconds and I'll pop the response up on the screen so that we can see how many of you have actually set time aside to do this. And I'll just share the results. So for those of you who answered, and 77% of you actually submitted a response, yes was 70% of you and 30% said no, Liz.
Okay, well, we're pleased to see that more than half of you are already set aside some time and aware of that, that grant guideline to attend and participate in the action research. If we move on to the next slide, if we could, Tina, it's really to say that why the projects are being required to use an action research approach is that it is a process that helps you to continuously reflect and improve on the work you're doing with the project, and most importantly, it's a way of ensuring that you can share the outcomes and the learnings with other projects and people who are interested in doing this work that didn't actually or weren't successful in receiving these grants. So what is action research? If we could, action research refers to a group of research approaches or methodologies that broadly are about pursuing action and change and research to find out about how things are happening at the same time. This body of methodological knowledge, if you like, and research links to anti-oppressive and emancipatory theories with international educationalists many of you may have heard of, such as Paulo Freire and Agri-Sinchon. And in Australia, people like Yolande Wadsworth, Ernie Stringer, and Bob Dick, who've put together resources that are very accessible. For example, Yolande Wadsworth's book, Do It Yourself Social Research and Everyday Evaluation on the Run, are resources that many community groups have been using for decades now. They're very accessible ways of ensuring that you reflect on the work that you're doing. The Stronger Families Learning Exchange, Reconnect, and the Family Relationship Services, and organisations such as the Aboriginal Health Council of South Australia have also been using this action research approach. It's a dynamic process, action research, that involves cycles of planning, acting, collecting or observing what's happening, and then reflecting and planning again for new action. Now, a quote that I've put in there, "Nothing about us without us," is something that I think is very relevant to the values implied in action research. It's often participatory, and it aims for the people most affected by the research to play a crucial role in defining the research focus and sometimes in doing the research as well. So the message there is that action research helps to build knowledge, and in this instance it's very much about the practice of what is being done in our projects. That cycle, if we move on to the next slide there, it's of plan, act, collect and reflect. In a very simple way, we could say that we use these skills and processes in our everyday life. And I'm going to use the example of, just making myself a cup of coffee. So when we decide that we're going to make a cup of coffee, in a sense, we're planning what are the steps involved in making that coffee. We act, for example, we go to the cupboard to get a cup. In a sense, we survey the cupboard. We look in there. We decide, we get data about the cups that are available to us. Look at their colour, their texture. In some instances, we look at their cleanliness, and we reflect on that data from that we've gathered about that little survey of collecting data about the cups. We might pick up a white cup but put it in the sink because it's not clean enough, and we decide to select the red cup instead, for example, because we knew we washed it well yesterday. And then we plan the other steps involved by, about putting the kettle on, putting the coffee in the cup and so forth. So I'm just trying to get across that in some ways this plan, act, collect and reflect is something that we do in our everyday life. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to spend a bit of time on this slide because it's got quite a lot of text, as you can see, and we've tried to colour coordinate it to distinguish, if you like, the steps involved where it is plan, act, collect and reflect. And in this instance, just to look at the planning, the example of the coffee cup wasn't involved in interacting with other people, but most of the work that we're doing in much action research really is about building relationships in this first planning stage. Building relationships with the people for whom and about whom the research is about. It's also about planning that's informed, looking at what's already known about the issues and refining, in a sense, what you want to find out, and agreeing with the people that are involved in your project about a plan of how you're going to do what you want to do in your project and in your action research. So the acting in this instance will be very much about delivering the activities you identify in your work plan for the project. And as part of that, we're suggesting that you collect information as you are delivering those activities. Then the word analysis comes up in the reflection steps. So we want you to look at the meaning of the information you collected and tell us about how and what that information is informing you in your project. In many instances, the reflecting is telling the story of the project, of what you did, what you found out, what you learned, and how that may inform the next cycle of planning again. Another aspect in the action is about considering how you're going to disseminate your research findings, how you're going to share the results. Is it going to be a report? Perhaps you're going to have a community event. Perhaps you'll develop some resources, do a radio program, and we'll be talking about those things with you individually as projects as well as in the workshops. Now at this point, we've got another poll, because we do like to feel that you're not just being entirely, well, it's not a lecture, but it does feel a little bit like it's one directional at the moment. But here we go, Tina, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Liz. All right, so the next poll is asking you, do you have a better understanding of what action research is now? If you could select either yes or no and hit submit, we'll gain an understanding of how you're going in terms of understanding the information that Liz is providing you today. So we've got 77% up already, and I'll close the poll, and here's the results. There you go, Liz. So 100% of the people who responded have said yes, that they do have now a better understanding of what action research is.
That's terrific. Thank you for that feedback. And we'll keep going, because we're looking a bit more into some of the principles that are involved in action research as well. So it's great to hear that you've kind of understood that way in which action research links to practice. And it really is about practitioners as researchers working in collaborative ways to identify the issues and develop processes for improvements in their communities and organisations. So with this slide, we'd ask you to think about what collaboration may mean in your project. It's a word that can mean a great deal of different things in different settings. So, and as we move on, we've got a table that's on the next slide. That's an example that we've developed from another resource, the Action Research and Learning Toolkit in Tasmania. It's an example of a stakeholder analysis template. So this is something that you could use to identify who it is that you may be collaborating with. And again, we've got another poll question here.
Thanks, Liz. So this time the question is, would you use a template like this? So just answer yes or no, and we will make sure you get hold of a copy of this template. And just while you're doing that, I'll just remind you about the opportunity to type questions into the field at the bottom of your control panel there. And when you submit those through, Stephanie will be looking after those questions and asking them of Liz throughout the session and at the end. So we have just about got all answers for this poll. I'll close the poll now and share the results with you, Liz. So
okay.
Yes, 91%.
Terrific. Thank you for that feedback. And I should also let you know that the template comes from a larger document which will be available to all projects and currently is available to all projects on our webpage. People that said no, I'd really like to hear from you why you said no. We realise it probably looks a little bit daunting for some projects, but any feedback would be welcome. Now, I also realise, if we can move along a bit, Tina, that the next few slides are in a sense, given that you said that you already understood action research, I hope this is not too repetitive for you, but we'll go through them reasonably quickly. So another principle about action research is there is not a right or a wrong objective answer. Those in the research help to shape the questions asked, participate in document in reporting the improvements. So it's really looking at what's good, what's better, what's best, if you like. And it provides a model for reflecting on the project directions and outcomes as you're going. So here we've got some text signs, as well as for some people they get signs from the natural environment as well as the directions of text. And using, in the next slide, using action research, it's about adjusting and fine-tuning what it is your project is doing in real time. So unlike perhaps many other projects where you're expected to do exactly what you said in your plan at the very beginning, in an action research project, it's part of the process to be able to change your plan, to be able to adapt it. You may find additional stakeholders over the time of the project that you're working with. You may change to a participatory model where you involve more of the people using services. You may find that you need specialist support and look towards connecting with universities or other research organisations. These are things that you're absolutely allowed to do. It's just about documenting why you did those things so that we can understand, you can understand firstly, and you can help other people understand why those changes have helped improve your project. So it is, moving on to the next one, it is about encouraging skills and knowledge transfer, also our project from ANROWS. And now I am going to move on to talking about the action research approach that we are using in working with you, to let you know that we want to encourage you to share your knowledge and skills with each other. And that informs our project plan, which we'll move on to a bit further along. It's important to document and share the lessons because we want to know from a range of communities what works in building safety. And also, we do already know about some of the drivers of inequality. There is very fine national and international research that tells us that the drivers of inequality what the drivers of inequality are. And your projects in general have outlined what you know about violence against women in your area and how you plan to address those drivers. Many of the projects are about awareness raising, improving knowledge of support services, and helping to coordinate services and programs in your local areas. And we want to know how that works in your community, in your project, because it will help to build the evidence base that can be used by other communities as well. So action research is, if we move on, Tina, about reflecting on how you're doing that work. It doesn't have to involve theoretical knowledge or extensive theoretical knowledge and training, but of course, we're not suggesting that you don't use that information. But how you structure in some regular reflection, if you could go back, Tina, I'm still on the previous one. Yeah. How you structure in reflection time with your work. And here I could give some examples that you might actually put it in your diary each week to make sure that you do record and reflect on the work you're doing. So as a team, you might have regular meetings with notes. You might invite other people to look at the work you're doing and give you some feedback in your local community about the project. And to really have some questions about what went well, what could be improved, what didn't go to plan, what might you change next time. So if we do move on now, Tina, sorry. Yeah. So what went right, what went wrong, what you're not sure about, it might depend. What other resources might be useful. And in this sense, we want to identify also what to avoid as well as what works. And it is about innovation. We don't expect, actually I will stop here and ask you, Stephanie, if we have any questions that have come through.
Sure, thanks,
and if we
Liz.
haven't, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a question here. That is, do you expect projects to submit reports to ANROWS?
Okay. We don't expect projects to submit reports. They need to submit reports to their grant, to the Department of Social Services as part of their grant reporting. We'd be very happy if projects wanted to share those reports, and we're also happy to work with them about how they report on the action research aspect of their projects in those reports. And in the next few slides, I will outline how we're planning our project and applying the action research approach as a way of walking the talk, which may give you an example of also how you might approach your project. Hello?
Great, thanks,
okay.
Liz. There's also one other question here, which is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. There's just one other question here that is around what support can we expect to receive from ANROWS? Okay.
Now, I am going to outline those now. If it's all right, we could come back to that to see if I have answered that question following the next few slides, yeah?
Okay, great.
Okay. Thanks, Steph. So in our plan, we've got the support that we have is the capacity to visit your project on site, as well as facilitating and presenting webinars and workshops. the Action Research Project is modelled on 3 cycles of action research, and each cycle involves the plan, act, collect and reflect steps, where we want to do that informed by the Building Safe Communities for Women practitioners and project workers, what your needs and knowledge are. And for example, we did a scoping survey with all the projects to inform what we would present in the first workshop, and we'll continue to do that consultation with you. In addition, the projects are informed by scholarly research, the literature, and what we know about what's happening with advocacy to prevent violence against women. So the next slide is an attempt to give you a visual representation, because we all have different ways of learning, of what I was just describing. And as you can see, the 3 circles are about the act, observe, reflect and plan processes. We're doing that at each stage with the first workshop, the second workshop and the third workshop. The new 12 projects unfortunately missed the first workshop, but hopefully this webinar will give them some of the, or most of the information that we covered, plus we will be doing visits as soon as practicable. So moving along, the next slide just explains that further, that Stephanie and myself as the Action Research Support staff are available to discuss and reflect on your project on the phone, through email, coming to visit and meet with you at your projects. And the webinars and workshops are opportunities not only to do that with us, but to do that with other Building Safe Communities for Women projects. And we would also like to encourage the development of a community of practice where people can speak together online, or perhaps through sharing a blog or a Facebook group that again will enable that dialogue between the projects. Now we have another poll question here as well.
Thanks, Liz. So the next question is, do you know what a community of practice is? So if you could answer yes or no there, that would be fantastic. We have 29% okay, 50%, we're getting there. Just as you're answering the question there, I'll just let you know we've got quite a number of questions coming through. So again, if you have any questions for Liz, just type them into the bottom of your control panel there. And I think we're just about right to close that poll, and I'll share the results with you now. There you go, Liz.
Okay. Okay, so some people don't know and some people do. It's close to half and half. More people don't know than do know. So thank you for that feedback, because we will share some more information with you about what a community of practice is through emails, and I think that we will address that at the first workshop as well. I haven't got information about that in this particular webinar, so I trust that you'll be happy for us to get back to you and discuss that further. I just wanted to give you now, thank you again for filling in that information, just wanted to give you some more information now about the project outline that we have worked on in working to deliver our support to you. So during the first cycle of this project, from January to June, we worked on developing a project outline, and we developed a scoping exercise, a survey that we have now asked all projects to fill in, that would give us an idea of what your skills and learning needs and interests are around action research, there's also at least a third of the projects that are specifically focused on working with Aboriginal communities, and that informed a decision to engage an Aboriginal workshop co-facilitator, which was fantastic at the Adelaide workshop held in June. We've been working with the participants at the workshop and doing some visits, and also at that first workshop we invited participants to share stories about what they've already been doing. In terms of the collecting stage of action research, we did an evaluation form, and we've been getting further feedback through our site visits. Responses to the workshop evaluation, site visits, and a second questionnaire are being used to inform our next cycle, as well as literature and wider discussions in the field. So you'll see in the next slide, which we're calling Cycle 2, from June to December of this year, we've revised our project outline because we've got 12 additional projects, but also because we had feedback from the workshops and during the site visits. We've also decided, rather than having for the second workshop just one national workshop, we'll have two workshops, one in the East Coast and one in the West Coast, partly because we've got increased numbers, but also for the ease of participants. The webinars have been organised and we're now in the process of delivering them. So our actions are very much about delivering the webinars, developing the workshops, doing the visits. And we also have action happening with our action research support webpage, where we are posting resources. And here I'd like to invite you to share with us any specific resources that you're finding useful in your projects that we can post up on the web as well. And again, we're doing that collecting of information, revisiting the project plan, and we'll reflect on what comes out of the workshops and these webinars. Moving into Cycle 3, from December till June, and initially the projects have been funded until June 2017, but that date has now been revised, and as part of our reflective process, we'll adjust our plan, and I will change that date to December 2017. Because the new projects started late, their end date will be December, and the existing projects, the initial 28 projects, had also started a little bit later, and many of those projects, whilst they, I believe, won't be able to get additional resources, will be able to extend the timelines for their projects till December 2018. So as you can see there, we will be revising that project outline, giving more attention to how we might use the information gained over this project to feed back to the field, or what's called knowledge translation and exchange. We are planning a national workshop, which will be a bigger one, bringing all the projects together. And we have to be careful to introduce the new projects with the existing projects. We don't want to, beyond this particular webinar, be talking about the old and the new projects. We're all the 40 projects from here on in. And we'll also be looking at publications, and ANROWS will be inviting and discussing this at the workshops, but inviting the Building Safe Communities for Women projects to consider whether you would like to put out a publication, maybe with small stories from the field about what you found in your projects. Now, I think the other areas there are reasonably straightforward. As you can see, it's a bit of a similar thing where we collect information through the visits, the webinars, the literature, the workshops. We ourselves are also keeping a reflective journal about the project story of how we're doing our action research with you. And if the community of practice does eventuate, that will also hopefully provide some more lessons about how to work together. I think we'll move on to the next slide from here. Okay, so just to recap, action research is different or distinct from traditional academic research in the sense that it's very clear that it has a goal of change, not purely to report on the production of knowledge, but to make that knowledge useful. Not that I'm saying to use that knowledge, to make it a process of change as you're doing it. You're unlikely to be testing a hypothesis as traditional research does. And it's the process of practice and the practice of research that's as important as the products. So, for example, designing a survey about, let me think, I had an example in mind. Designing a survey about action research like we did, for example, in the scoping survey. It brought together different staff members. If you were doing something similar in your organisation or your area, it might bring together a range of team leaders, project staff, maybe even people on your board. And that's an outcome, as well as the actual survey. That bringing together of people may help to build a shared understanding of what domestic and family violence is and how you define it in your organisation. So this next slide is about keep it simple. If you can, use existing systems. Put the action research on your team meeting agenda. Report it in your usual management reports or project reports. Have a graffiti board in your lunchroom. That was a suggestion if you've got a whiteboard or a blackboard, or use butcher's paper, and invite people in your organisation and project to write comments, draw pictures, ask questions. Try to sort of be active in the way that you're doing your action research. Keep inviting that discussion with stakeholders regularly. And of course, the minutes and notes of any meetings, consultations or events that you do as part of your projects are an important part of the data that you can use. How you frame your learnings, if we move on to the next slide. Are you there, Tina?
That should have changed.
Hello?
Liz? Yep, got me.
Okay, yep, have now.
There we go.
Sorry.
Sorry, there's a bit of a lag.
That's okay. Just thinking about how you frame the learnings from your project as well, or the lessons. Whose voices are you documenting? Do you have a diversity of people that are contributing to the work that you're doing, or have you got a specific focus, maybe with youth, or maybe with particular cultural groups? If you can document why you decided to do that particular project in that way, and think about how information is shared in the area that you're working, as well as the publications, resources that you develop. Are there other ways in which people in your community, is there a grapevine that people share information, not only in written form? And if things don't go according to plan, think about how you're recording this and if and how you make any changes. It may not be possible to make the changes you'd like to be making, but remember, all learning's important, as well as the successes. The mistakes teach us something as well. So the lessons are about recognizing the mistakes, observing what works, documenting them, and thinking about how you're going to share them. Most importantly as well, when you're doing action research, is to consider how you let people know that you are doing this form of research, that you need to think about human research ethics. And human research ethics are a set of principles that help guide researchers to do research in a way that's safe, respectful, responsible, and of high quality. And we've got a couple of formal websites there that you can go to read about formal research ethics. But I did want to remind you at the beginning of this webinar, we mentioned that most people will have had some contact, for example, with family and domestic violence, and it's always important and an important part of your ethics to let people know about what services are available. And there are national telephone services that you can refer people to as a baseline. The next slide also is talking about reflective practice and ethics. And the action research that we're doing is a part of reflecting on your work and improving practice. So in some instances, you may not need formal ethics approval. In fact, in most instances, you won't need formal ethics approval because you're doing this within the guidelines and framework of the management policies and systems of the organisations that have applied for the research grant. So you need to follow, of course, those general practices. And even if you're a direct service delivery organisation rather than a research delivery or community development, and if you're a community development service, your organisation will have management policies about how long and how you store information about clients or projects. And if you haven't already done so, I'd encourage you to find out what those information management policies are and ensure that you follow them with your project. Another important way of ensuring that you're doing ethical research is to do an outline of what your project's about and invite participants to give their informed consent. You can do that in written form. You can also do that as a statement, as a verbal statement. But a project statement and a form for people to sign saying that they understand what the research is about is another formal ethics process that you can use. Participants should always have access to information about any research project in plain English or in other forms that they can understand. Okay, if we can move along now. Actually, one thing I should say here is that ANROWS considered whether we needed a formal ethics application in the work that we're doing, but we have followed ethical practice in doing a project statement that we've sent out to people. We invite you to give your consent if we are doing any publications or taking photos at any events. And we realised that it wouldn't be possible to get all your organisations to be part of a formal ethics application. But we will be following those basic ethical practices of storing data confidentially and consulting with you, as I said, throughout the whole process. Now, just to recap, moving on to the action research cycle, and as you can see, that cycle kind of follows what we did in the action research support project. And if we move along, we've got an example in the next one where I've just put an example of a project where you want to increase awareness of the causes of domestic and family violence amongst young people in your community. And in doing your planning, acting and reflecting, you've decided that you're going to focus on education services as part of that raising of awareness. And then you've decided that you're going to work with some secondary schools, and you'll probably use the plan, act, collect and reflect cycle in each of those stages. So if we look at the next slide, you might also look at a specific research question related to that focus of youth. Will developing a youth-focused domestic violence network increase awareness of DV issues among youth? And if not, why not? So in that refining of your research question, say that you were looking at work in secondary schools, and then you decided that through that process you were refining it to this question, you may also want to look at some other literature and research to see what else has been done in this area. And this is something that Dr. Peter Cox's webinar on Friday will give you some tips and tricks about where you might look and how you would gather together some of that information. As you're doing it, as you're perhaps working with the schools and deciding, perhaps you found it wasn't achievable to develop a network of youth-focused domestic violence services, you want to explore what other options there might be. So your E in looking at education, for example, in your plan didn't work. So what else might you do to engage with youth? And if your plan doesn't work, remember the alphabet's got 25 more letters. So stay cool, or be hot, as young people might say too, and move on to some other ideas. And this next example is to try and get you to see, if you like, that if it wasn't working, move on to a focus on another example. So perhaps when you engage with those young people, talking with them in the schools, you may have engaged with them about developing a network, you put that forward, but they may have said, look, the best way to really raise awareness about domestic violence in this area, in our community, is to have a music event. So they might suggest not having a full-on festival perhaps, but they may say, let's have a concert. Let's get all the local musicians involved. Okay, so that's an example of moving on to M for music. Just going back to looking at your plan when you go back to look at your plan. And here I'm now talking about your specific plan, the Building Safe Communities for Women project. You might want to review your project proposal and look at what action you were planning to take. What were you looking to change? Brainstorm it further with your work colleagues and other stakeholders, and feel free to talk with Stephanie and myself. You might want to try another approach, or you might really want some more ideas about how to implement E rather than M. So the points to consider, recapping again, when you're looking at developing your research question or focus, it doesn't have to be a research question. It's good when you do get a question, and it can be as broad as, what does it take to build safe communities? But look, if your question aligns with what you proposed you were doing in your grant application, see if it can have an observable outcome. Make sure the focus is manageable and that it can be studied within the time and resources that you have. So, for example, you may not really be able to measure attitudinal change. That's a very complex area. But you may be able to get qualitative feedback about participants and hear about specific things they plan to do or would like to see done in the community as a result of some awareness training that you were doing with them. Ensure there's information's available for clients in the services when you are doing any kind of training around that. And think about if you can access the data that you needed to answer the question. Next, I'm going to talk with you. We're going to move from the Action Research Support Project at ANROWS and your Building Safe Communities for Women and Their Children projects to look at a bigger project, because the work that we're doing does have some relevance to this larger story of what is happening to prevent violence against women and their children. And Change the Story is a national primary prevention framework that is based around research. It's a project that is being rolled out through Our Watch, which is another national organisation aiming to reduce violence against women and their children. And the Change the Story framework was developed in consultation with ANROWS and a number of other key peak organisations and governments and non-government people that have been working in this area for a long period of time. And actually here I would like to also remind us all that this work has been going for a long period of time. And it's an old point, but one to remember that it was once within legislation that a man should not hit his wife with a rod thicker than his thumb. I'm sure many of you are well aware of that, but it is a reminder that we've moved forward. We have moved forward and we will continue to move forward. And I want to just say here that the research in Change the Story is based on these drivers of inequality about condoning violence against women, men's control of decision making and limits to women's independence, rigid stereotypes and constructions of what it is to be a man or a woman, a father, a mother, a daughter, a son, rigid stereotypes about those roles and characteristics of who we are. and also male-peer relations that emphasise aggression and disrespect rather than respect and harmony. Now, I'm going to stop here for another poll because we'd like to hear if you're interested in this broader picture as well.
Thanks, Liz. So this is the final poll for the day, and again we're asking, would you like to learn more about how the National Primary Prevention Framework might be useful to your project and future work? So if you could just answer yes, no, or you're not sure yet, that would be fantastic. So everyone has almost completed the poll. Just wait a couple more moments and we'll close it down.
Good, thank you.
And I'll close that now, and I'll just share the results with you now, Liz.
Okay. Oh, well, that's a great result. It's good to see that that all participants can see the value in being part of the bigger story, as well as the local story. So thank you for that, and we will follow that up again to ensure that we perhaps have a webinar with more details about that particular framework, and even we may invite some content about that at one of the workshops. Now, we're nearly at the end of this webinar, and I'm sure that you're all probably overhearing my voice. So we did just want to alert you, though, to the webpage on the ANROWS website, which will keep improving and adding to remind you that 1-800 have many resources and information on their website, as does the Our Watch organisation, particularly around changing the story, and the White Ribbon campaign. Now, I think that we have reached the end there, but we should just check in with you, Steph, if there are some questions for discussion at this point.
Yeah, sure. We do have a few questions here, and yeah, I guess we still do have a little bit of time left, so if people did want to write something in now would be a good time to do it. So I'll just have a look through. So one question was around, will ANROWS be producing a publication from the Action Research Report?
Okay. ANROWS is contracted to provide a report to the Department of Social Services, but as I said, we would like to discuss with the Building Safe Communities for Women projects doing a publication to share your stories from your projects. So I would like to say that it's on the agenda, but it's not confirmed. And I'm also aware if anybody is needing to leave the webinar before we discuss any more questions, if I could thank you for attending and to please invite you to give your feedback about the content of and the presentation through a survey that will be sent to you as a part of the webinar. Is that right, Tina, that it gets sent out to people, or is it available now for people to do?
So as soon as the webinar is closed down, a survey will appear on everyone's computers just for people to fill in just a few questions, which should only take a minute or two.
Okay, and I did want to also note that we have been recording the webinar, so it will eventually be up on, or it will be up on the ANROWS Action Research Support webpage for your colleagues to watch, and the slides will all be available. Yeah.
That's right. It's another way to share the information.
And I'm going to turn my webcam back on and thank people in person for making the time to join us today and to let you know that we're really looking forward to the workshops and your participation in the workshops. Please be in contact with Steph and I over the phone or via email if we can be of any assistance about any aspect of your action research. Don't hesitate to be in contact. And I'll turn it off now so that you can, it's off.
No, you're back on, Liz.
Now.
There we go.
Okay, I'm off.
All right, well, I think that wraps up today's session. Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Stephanie, for looking after the questions. Stephanie, are there any more questions?
There was one more question, but I think the person has had to leave now, but we could look at it anyway if you like. It was around stakeholder engagement. They were asking about how do we get a shared understanding of the issues and gain support from different organisations and different groups. It was around engaging men, around preventing violence against women, and concerns around that men may, I'll just make sure I get it right, concerns around strengthening male privilege and competition with women's organisations for funding. So I think it's around making sure that the people you're engaging with have a shared understanding of the issue and what you're working on.
Right. I think that's a very big question to answer that I would like to suggest we might put into one of the workshops, but also to say that there is a very good resource developed by Women's Health West on their website, and again we could put a link up for this, that is about how to address those issues of male privilege and how to engage men in the discussion in a way that doesn't reinforce a more dominant voice, I suppose. Is there any follow-up to that with any further questions?
We don't have any other questions coming through now, so that looks like it's about it. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Stephanie, and we will put that link up because I do think it's a very good resource for people to read through and think about. Okay. Well, again, thank you everyone for your attendance. Please fill in the survey, and I hope that you can also attend the webinar this Friday with some tips and tricks about accessing data, research, literature.
Fantastic. Thanks, Liz. So that's our cue now to end the webinar. Thanks for attending, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you on Friday. Bye.
Thanks, Tina. Bye, everyone.